Time to back out for a drive. Ugh, it's like trying to decode the construct through a BlackBerry. In this series, I'm going to be converting my Gallardo from this factory Audi RNS-E with 6-inch screen to this Atoto 7-inch screen and 720p backup camera, bringing my Gallardo into the modern era. Without further ado, let's get right to it. First, I'll go over everything needed for the install. The piece de resistance is the Atoto S8 Gen 2 head unit. It comes with the USB cables for phone and extra storage, the Wi-Fi and GPS antennas, a mic for phone calls, brackets for single and double DIN installation, the DIY plug with wires to build a harness, plastic frames, 2 screen protectors in clear and frosted, manuals, and the unit itself. All was well packed and looked high quality. The next thing is the Atoto AC-HD02LR 720p 150-degree camera. The camera itself is nice with a metal case, but the bracket's kinda cheap and packing wasn't as nice here, to where the mounting bracket was slightly bent upon opening. No real issue though, as I plan to mount the camera in the factory location for a clean install. Some additional items needed were the wiring harness for Audi equipped with the RNS-E stereos, dual VW radio antenna adapter, and the VW Audi radio removal tools. Finally, there's a lot of tools I recommend for this job, which I've listed in the video description, including a lot of soldering equipment and mechanics tools. Before getting to the install, I wanted to test a couple things. First, I had read from a couple Atoto reviews online that the unit could draw some amperage even with the accessory wire off. But my test showed it going down to 0.01 amps or even less after 20 seconds, which would be like a month or so even on an 18650 battery, so well within spec. Next, I powered up the unit on the bench to make sure it functioned correctly. I did a quick run through of the settings and took this opportunity to set the startup logo to the Lamborghini shield. Finally, I hooked up the camera to make sure it was working correctly. It already looks better than what's in my car. The last thing to tackle before going to the car was installing the screen protector. I wiped the screen with a clean microfiber towel and then gently used some masking tape to remove the small final stubborn dust specks. I then applied the screen protector per the instructions, starting on one side and slowly applying pressure across to ensure no bubbles. It was now time for the removal of the old head unit. With the key in the ignition in the accessory position, first press the button to rotate the screen down. Then all 4 removal keys can be inserted into the unit, with the key part facing inward. Once all 4 are inserted snugly, the unit can be pulled straight out. After putting a towel down to protect my switches, I was now able to work all the wires free from the unit, specifically the Audi Connect, the main harness, the double antenna, and the GPS antenna. With all these removed, the unit can be taken out of the car. With the head unit out of the car, the removal keys can be removed by pushing in the release tabs for each one. Now, another thing I had read online is that the Audi RNS-E radio harness was not correct for the headlight indicator and the accessory power. Using a multimeter, I was able to confirm that this was indeed true. There was nowhere that provided 12 volts with the key on but 0 volts with it off, and nowhere that switched power with the headlights on either. So I went looking in the next closest place that was easy to access, the center console. With a long flathead screwdriver wrapped in a rag, I carefully pried up the console cover to reveal the wiring. I immediately noticed that while the factory has dummy switches for the US spec LP Gallardos for the two switches that are to the left of the mirror controls, the factory wiring harness is still there and plugged into those dummy switches. After unplugging it and testing, I found the top rightmost pin when looking at the connector with the tab on the left provided 6 volts when turning on the headlights. I also found that the pin just below it was supplying accessory power with the key on. However, it was only about 9 to 10 volts, which is not enough to power the head unit's accessory line and the backup camera. So I went with the Maxwell approved Adafuse instead. To gain access to the fuse panel, I removed the passenger side floor mat and small piece of carpet. I then loosened the 3 half-turn screw things and popped out the access panel. I was immediately greeted with the Cirrus radio unit, which I knew I would not be using at all. So I proceeded to remove the 3 bolts and unplug the 2 connectors and antenna, and I removed that from the car as well. The 12-volt reverse indicator can be found in the green C connector after removing it from the main RNS-E connector and removing the green housing. It is pin 2 here. Shout out to Espen Lund of the forums for tipping me off to this one. With the car ready and knowing where all the wires go, I started wiring the Red Wolf Audi harness to the Atoto harness. I first used the heat shrink to tie off all the wires not used on the Audi harness, which in my case was everything but the yellow power, black ground, and front 2 pairs of speaker wires. For the Atoto wiring, the rear speakers, the CAN wires, and the steering wheel plus and minus wires were tied off. After this, I soldered the wires that went straight across between the two, the yellow power, the black ground, and the 4 speaker wires. Remember to put the heat shrink on the wire before soldering them together, so it can be slid up and then sealed. Otherwise, the wire has to be completely unsoldered and you have to start over again. I repeated this process for the ground and 4 speaker wires as well. Wiring the antenna into the harness was next. The antenna came with some clip on the blue wire, but I cut it off and stripped and soldered the wire directly to the blue wire on the Atoto harness. This is the same as I've done with all the wires to this point. Soldering the Tamiya connector for the sub-harness was next, as I wanted to be able to remove the main harness independently. I pre-tinned the contact, stripped the wire, pre-tinned the wire, and finally soldered them together. The final thing to do is pinch the contacts closed with the forceps and snap both connectors into the plastic housing. Note, while I use the Tamiya connectors, it's because I had them on hand. Any build-a connector will do. I went about constructing the car sub-harness after completing the main one. Since the process of creating this harness was similar to the main harness, I'll just show what it looks like before and after adding the plastic wire loom. One thing to note though is that here I used the 0.1 inch or 2.54 millimeter header kit that I had on hand to plug into the headlight and C connector for reverse light. These fit perfectly into the factory harness when heat shrunk together, though missing the correct plastic clips, so electrical tape is needed to secure them after plugging them in. And here's the final main harness attached to the Atoto and ready to go to the car. Back in the vehicle, after connecting my custom 0.1 inch adapter for the headlight signal, I then routed the sub-harness up into the double DIN area. I carefully pulled it through, making sure to leave enough slack to avoid chafing in the future. I then finished the 12-volt accessory line with the Adafuse block down into the passenger area. I plugged in the Adafuse into slot number 19 and tucked the wire back up for a clean install. I then inserted the main harness, making sure to clip the factory clipping mechanism securely. And after this, it was just a matter of plugging in the main connector and the radio antenna into the Atoto. I then plugged in my connectors for the sub-harness, plugged in the factory FM antenna and was ready to temporarily slide the unit in place. Success! The unit is wired and working in the car. The music from the SD card works great as well. It even sounds better than the factory RNS-E, even with the stock speakers, just with some EQ adjustments, though still not quite as good as my wife's 991-911 with the Bang & Olufsen. While it seems that the job is almost complete since the unit is powered and working, there are still a lot of issues to tackle. Next time, I need to address the poor connection for the double antenna into the car. Remove the spoiler from the car to install the new backup camera. Figure out the backup camera wiring to get it working. And of course, design a permanent mounting solution for the head unit to secure it into the car and to cover up all the ugliness. If you want to see this project come to completion, make sure to like and subscribe so you'll be notified when the next videos drop. Thanks for watching. Godspeed.